Matthew chapter 2, beginning at verse 1 and going through verse 12. Hear these words. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem, in the territory of Judea, during the reign of King Herod, Magi came from the east to Jerusalem. They asked, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We've seen his star in the east, and we've come to honor him." When King Herod heard this, he was troubled, and everyone in Jerusalem was troubled with him. He gathered all the chief priests and the legal experts and asked them where the Christ was to be born. They said, "In Bethlehem of Judea. For this is what the prophet wrote. You, Bethlehem, land of Judah, by no means are you least among the rulers of Judah, because from you will come one who governs, who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the Magi and found out from them the time when the star had first appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search carefully for the child. When you found him, report to me, so that I too may go and honor him." When they heard the king, they went, and look, the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stood over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with Mary his mother. Falling to their knees, they honored him. Then they opened their treasure chests and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Because they were warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they went back to their own country by another route. Brothers and sisters, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. One of the things that we get very frequently here in this wonderful place of Idaho, particularly southern Idaho, are these things called inversions, which I had to explain to somebody the other day. And they just, for some reason, were like, I don't get it. That happens? That's real? Why would you live there? And so I explained to her, I said, you know those days where it's kind of cloudy and rainy, and it's just gray all across the sky from horizon to horizon, and you know the sun is shining, but there's not any direct sunlight? Imagine that for weeks, if not months. And again, she's like, that sounds terrible. Why would you want to live there? Because it's great otherwise. But I tell you what, as much as inversions are frustrating and even painful at times, it feels like, there is something so powerful and beautiful about the sky being dark and dismal and gray, and then all of a sudden, the sunlight just breaks through it. I don't know if there's a proper name for that, of when sunlight just kind of breaks through and you just see the rays of sunshine pouring out of the dark clouds. I love that image. Not just because I think it's a powerful symbol of hope, but because I find that is one of those things, when I talk to people who are not Christians, they look at that, and there is something about that image of just the sun rays breaking down from the heavens. And they say, you know, I don't believe in God, but it's things like this that make me wonder. It's these moments where something so beautiful, so captivating happens. You think, there's got to be something else going on. And so, it is wonderful that today in the church calendar, we celebrate the day called Epiphany. Epiphany is a word that means manifestation, particularly of a divine nature. There's a lot of talk these days amongst younger crowds about manifesting, about if you want something, if you hope for something, if you look for something, you manifest it, you kind of wish it and hope it into existence. Well, this is not something that necessarily was expected or necessarily hoped for. And yet, the Epiphany is the manifestation, is the revelation, we might say, of Christ, the light of the world, coming in, breaking into our dark, broken places, into our dark, broken lives, and bringing light. But it's not just that this is light that comes to us, but this is a light that comes to all the world. And that is the power and the beauty of this day called Epiphany. The star that we see over Bethlehem, the star that often tops our Christmas trees and our decorations. That star is important, not just because it is representative of the light of Christ coming into the world, but it is the light of Christ being shown and being given for all people. And so that is why we read this story today about these wise men from the east who show up looking for a newborn king of the Jews because they have seen his star. The light of Christ has reached even those on the outside and brought them in. Now, we hear about the wise men, and we are pretty familiar with them, whether it's because of Christmas carols, whether it's because of nativity scenes, or we've heard this story in Matthew's Gospel over and over and over and over again. Some things you may not realize about this story. One is that the arrival of the wise men happens about 2 years after the birth of Jesus. They saw his star when he was born, and they decided to follow it. And scholars approximate that it took them about 2 years to get from where they were in probably Persia to Jerusalem. So spoiler alert, there were no magi in the nativity, in the manger. Sorry. You can still have them there if you want, because yeah, they do eventually show up. But they weren't there on that night. Something else that I think is really interesting is that the wise men are in the Greek called magi, which is not just, a wise person, but to think of them as astrologers, as scholars who study the stars and the world, people who can look to the heavens and by charting the stars can predict when things are going to happen, can know about certain events, and they just are very smart, intellectual, wise people. And so for these magi, for these astrologers to show up in Jerusalem was really, really weird. And to put it in kind of a context that would make sense for us, it would be as though, right here in Idaho, we had an African witch doctor, a Zen Buddhist monk, and an Aztec priest wander into town and say, "We have heard about Jesus. Where can we find him?" And all of us would look at them and say, "You are in the very wrong place. What are you doing here?" And yet, it's because they were faithful to the revelation and the epiphany of the light that they show up. Last little thing that we'll get to. Traditionally, we have 3 wise men because there are 3 gifts. However, there is nowhere in this story that says there were 3 of them. There could have been 2 of them. There could have been 20 of them. We don't know how many magi were there. We just know there was at least a few of them. and that they came bearing gifts. That they came because they had seen this star from the east, and they wanted to come and honor the newborn King of the Jews. Now they come into town asking these questions, trying to figure out what's going on, and Herod, the king, hears of this, and he is not happy. He is not happy because they come into town saying, "We're looking for the King of the Jews. Where is he?" And you can imagine Herod saying, "Why are they looking for the King of the Jews? I'm right here. Why aren't they coming to talk to me?" And so he becomes worried because he thinks, if they're not coming to talk to me, if they're not coming here to the palace to see me or my family, who are they coming to figure out? Who are they coming to see? And Herod gets nervous. So he gets all of the best Bible scholars together. He gets the chief priests and the legal experts, all the people who know the Torah, who know the Old Testament, inside and out, backwards and forwards. And they say, "Hey, come here, talk to me. These foreigners have just shown up, and they're talking about trying to find the King of the Jews. What's going on? Where is this Christ, this Messiah, supposed to be born?" And what they determine is they say, he's supposed to be born in Bethlehem, because this is what the prophet says. And I love these words. "You, Bethlehem, land of Judah, by no means are you least among the rulers of Judah, because from you will come one who governs, one who will shepherd my people, Israel." Someone is coming from this little Nowheresville Bethlehem, and he is going to be the one to govern and shepherd the people. Which sounds really wonderful, and we are excited about that. We rejoice with that. Herod gets more worried. And so what he does is he tries to bring the Magi in and get them on his side. He brings them in secret, which is already a sign of not good. And he asks them what's going on, what they're looking for. And then he sends them on their way and says, "Go, find this child. Fulfill this quest that's taken you a very long time to complete. When you figure out where he is, come and tell me, because I wish to go and worship this new king as well." We hear that, and we're like, that sounds really great. Glad to hear that Herod is on their side and that he's wanting to come and see Jesus. But what we don't get from the text here is that Herod has a reputation. You see, Herod is the king of the Jews, but he is king because of Rome. When the Romans came in decades before, took over everything, and established imperial rule and said, "We are the rulers of this place. We are the ones who are going to govern your land. Herod is going to be your king." End of story. And so Herod is king, but it's not always looked upon favorably, and of course, he's scared out of his mind that something is going to happen. Someone is going to come along and try to take this from him. So much so that he had one of his wives and two of his sons murdered on his order because of a conspiracy that they were going to usurp him. Always worried, always panicking that someone is going to come along and take him out. A really good term to describe him in that sense might be a megalomaniac. That's a fun word, you should use that. That's your 50-cent word for the day. Impress all your friends. Megalomaniac. It means someone who is obsessed with their own power or their own importance. We get the idea here from Herod. He was so obsessed with his power, with his station, with keeping and maintaining his position, that any possible threat was to be exterminated out of fear of what might happen. So again, Herod sends the Magi on their way, hoping they will lead him to this child and, shall we say, business can be taken care of. But when the Magi find Jesus, what is their response? How do they react to seeing the Christ child? They react with joy. They see the star, and it says that when the star settled over where he was, they had profound joy. Joy, not just because their quest had come to an end, not because they had finally gotten to the end of their adventure, but joy because this was the one who was promised. This is the King of the Jews. This is the Messiah. This is the one we've been looking for. And so they enter the house, and they find the baby, toddler Jesus, with his mother Mary. And here's the part that blows my mind. You see, these Magi, from where they are, in their context back home, they are highly respected, very revered and refined scholars, aristocrats who were part of the court. And they enter in to this poor family's house, and they see a toddler, and their response is to bow down and worship him. Think about that. These very illustrious, prestigious, magnificent people bowing down to a child. And not just worshiping him, but they also bring gifts. Very expensive, very incredible gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And we don't know if these gifts were given on purpose or if these were just the gifts that they presented because they felt they were worthy of such a person. But it's amazing how each of these three gifts foreshadow a part of Jesus' future. The gold is a representation of his royalty as king and his divinity as God. The frankincense is a spice used in the priestly practice of anointing, of incense, offering up prayers. And myrrh is a spice that is used when you bury your dead to cover the body and to take care of it and preserve it as it lies in death. So gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Gold for the King of Kings. Frankincense for the high priest of all. And myrrh for the one who has come to sacrifice and give his life. And by the way, all of that is happening. Can you imagine Mary, like kind of sitting at the kitchen table, looking at this little toddler Jesus, and all of these astrologers and scholarly magi sitting there giving him gifts? I wonder what she was thinking. I wonder if she had any idea what in the world is going on. And so after they give their gifts, and after they bring their honor and praise and worship to Jesus, they decide to head back home. And they are given the warning and agreement. Don't go back to Herod. That's not a good idea. Go back home. Go another way. Try something different. Now, there's a lot that we can talk about in here. There's so many interesting things. There's so much beauty and symbolism that we find in here. But as I sat with this text this week, there were 2 points that kept coming back to me over and over again that I really want to talk about. One is this. The Gentiles get it, but the Jews don't. These foreigners, these out-of-towners, they have no connection. They don't even have any kind of a faith background that is connected to Abraham or Moses, who know that something special is happening. Now, they probably had access to the scrolls of the Torah and at least knew about it, but they weren't believers. They weren't faithful followers of the ways of God. And yet, they figured something out. Conversely, you have, in Herod's position, you have the legal experts and the chief priests, the top Bible scholars in the world, who have all of it memorized, all of it deciphered. They have it right there. It is at their doorstep. And they totally miss it. They totally miss it. Isn't that fascinating? That they can even interpret and tell Herod, oh yes, the Messiah, King of the Jews, he's going to be born in Bethlehem. And this is what the prophet says, and this is how it's foretold. They got all the information, but they totally missed Jesus. And here's my conviction about that. Sometimes I wonder if those outside the church recognize Jesus better than those inside the church. I wonder, do those who are not a part, who have little to no background, can recognize, can see Jesus in the world, can see Jesus at work, can recognize the presence and the movement of the Spirit of God in ways that all of us are completely oblivious to. And yet, I think this is a wonderful reminder that the light of Christ is not just for the church, but the light of Christ is for all the world. God brings salvation. God wants to bring reconciliation to all people. No matter who they are, no matter where they come from, God is seeking to save all the world, not just those he already has. Which, by the way, we, as Gentile peoples who are not part of the Jewish covenant and heritage, we should all be very thankful for that. And what's powerful about this is the text that we read in Ephesians when Paul says, this was the plan all along. This wasn't just an add-on later. This wasn't just God going, well, now that Jesus has got the Jews sorted out, maybe we should open it up to everybody else. Why not? Sure, that sounds like a good idea. No, this was God's plan all along. To bring everybody under his rule and reign. To bring all creation into his redemptive purposes and promises. Thanks be to God that nothing, no one is beyond the light of Christ. That's my first thought. Here's my second one. Jesus, to certain people, is not so much a hope as he is a threat. You think about Herod. Now we heard about this newborn king of the Jews. And what is his response? He is troubled. He is afraid. He is worried. How insecure do you have to be afraid of a baby? How, shall I say, neurotic do you have to be to hear about this baby being born? A child born in poverty, who doesn't have anything, comes from Nowheresville. And yet, because people say he is the king of the Jews, Herod gets worried. And yet, I think part of the reason Herod gets worried is because this baby symbolizes what Herod has actually known all along, and that is that he's not the real king. Herod is appointed by Rome. He is a political puppet. He's not the real king. In fact, here's the really interesting thing. Herod, as someone who is appointed to be the king, he does not come from the line of David, which God promises David in the Old Testament to always have his line, his family, seated upon the throne, ruling over Israel. Jesus, whose father is Joseph, can trace his lineage all the way back to David. Which is why, as boring as it might be to the most of us, if you go back to Matthew chapter 1, you'll see this genealogy, this record of showing Abraham to David, and then David to Joseph. Like to us, we're like, it's a whole bunch of names. Most of them I can't even pronounce. Who cares? And yet this shows that Jesus comes from the line of David and is the royal one to sit upon the throne. Herod is not. Herod's been established by the military and political superpower of the day, and he can do whatever he wants, but he's not the real king. Jesus is the real king. And by being declared king, not just king of the Jews, but the King of Kings, Jesus dethrones all other kings and all other rulers. Because only Jesus the Christ, only he is worthy to rule over people in the world. We may give our amens for that. We may be grateful and glad to hear that. But I tell you what, rulers and authorities don't like that. People who are in positions of power, privilege, and prestige don't like it when those positions get threatened. So much so that they are willing to do whatever is necessary to keep it. And if you want to know what that looks like, look at chapter 2, verse 13. When the Magi had departed, an angel from the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod will soon search for the child in order to kill him." Joseph got up during the night and took the child and his mother to Egypt. They stayed there until Herod died. Skipping down to verse 16. When Herod knew the Magi had fooled him, he grew very angry. He sent soldiers to kill all the children in Bethlehem and in all the surrounding territory who were 2 years old and younger, according to the time that he learned from the Magi. who is so powerful, who is so terrifying and threatening that it would cause the mighty to slaughter children. How afraid, how insecure do you have to be to respond to the greatest gift of God, violence and destruction? It's something to think about, because we admit that when Jesus comes into the world, it kind of disrupts things. It takes the way things work and kind of sets them on their head. It makes us uncomfortable, especially the people who have a lot to lose. And yet, are you willing to give up, to let go of anything and everything that you might find the light of Christ that has come, that you may no longer live in darkness, that you may no longer be bound to a hopeless, disparaging existence? The light has come into the world, and this light is for all people. For anyone who would embrace it, for anyone who would seek after it. That includes the lowly, that includes the broken, that includes the poor. It does include the powerful. It does include the mighty. But they might be too afraid. They might be too secure in their position to receive it. It's one of the reasons why Jesus not only is born into a state of poverty, into a state of kind of on the margins, but throughout his ministry, he's always going to those people who are on the margins, those who are disenfranchised, those who are kind of outcasts, because it is those who are broken, those who live in darkness, who know